"Mom, eat this special bowl of oatmeal. I made it just for you." I was standing in the kitchen holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Through the slightly foggy glass of the cabinet door, I watched my son lean over and quietly drop something into my wife Eleanor's bowl of oatmeal. I didn't yell. I didn't run across the room. I simply watched. Then, when my daughter-in-law Brooke returned to the table, I calmly switched the bowls. No one noticed. At least, that was what they thought. I walked back to my usual seat by the window and sat down. Outside, a light rain fell steadily against the glass. The gray morning made the whole house feel tired, as if it had been carrying a burden for far too long. Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair with a blanket over her knees. Over the last few months, she had become thinner and weaker. It wasn't the normal change that comes with age. It felt different. Every week she seemed more exhausted. Every meal became smaller. Every smile became shorter. The hardest part was the way she looked at me, almost apologetically, as if being sick was somehow her fault. Caleb stood beside the dining table with one hand resting on the back of Brooke's chair. He always did that. He liked looking like a caring husband and a devoted son. But I had noticed something strange a long time ago. His hand never actually touched Brooke. There was always a small space between them, just enough distance to step away whenever necessary. "I made it lighter than yesterday," Caleb said calmly. "The doctor said Mom needs to eat more if she wants to get stronger." I stared into my tea. Which doctor? For months I had been the one driving Eleanor to appointments. I sat through every examination, every test result, every conversation. None of those doctors had suggested that her condition should be getting worse this quickly. Brooke sat down and adjusted the sleeve of her blouse. She always looked perfectly organized, even when she had nowhere to go. She liked appearing prepared, polished, and in control. The two bowls of oatmeal looked identical. Same color, same smell, same warmth. I took a sip of tea. It tasted weak. For some reason, I liked that. It matched the feeling growing inside me. Something wasn't right. Something was unfinished. Something important was missing. As I sat there, old memories slowly drifted through my mind. 4 months earlier, Caleb and Brooke had moved into our home. Their reasons sounded noble. They wanted to help. They wanted to take care of us. They said a large house shouldn't be maintained by two elderly people alone. Eleanor had smiled when she heard those words. And because she smiled, I agreed. At first, everything seemed normal. Then small changes began appearing. Brooke started controlling Eleanor's meals. She organized her medication schedule. She suggested new doctors. She postponed appointments. She insisted on handling nearly everything related to Eleanor's health. Meanwhile, Caleb suddenly became interested in every meal his mother ate. The same son who had barely entered a kitchen for years now cared deeply about nutrition. I said nothing. I watched. I noticed Eleanor often felt worse after breakfast. I noticed random dizzy spells. I noticed unusual weakness. And whenever I offered to prepare her food myself, Brooke always had an excuse. "Dad, you should rest. Dad, let me handle it. Dad, you've done enough." Always polite, always smiling, always refusing. That morning, when I saw Caleb secretly put something into Eleanor's oatmeal, a strange calm settled over me. Not fear, not anger, certainty. A man who has lived a long life learns to recognize when something feels wrong. I didn't know exactly what Caleb had dropped into the bowl, but I knew one thing: it didn't belong there. After switching the bowls, time seemed to move slower. Eleanor ate only a few spoonfuls. Brooke ate much more. She chatted casually about errands and appointments. Caleb barely touched his own breakfast. Instead, he watched Brooke. His eyes kept drifting toward her bowl. His smile stayed in place, but tension hid behind it. I folded my hands and waited. If they believed I was just an old man sitting quietly in the corner, they were making a serious mistake. I had no intention of rushing. People reveal themselves eventually. All you have to do is give them enough time. The rain continued outside. Inside, the silence felt heavy. Every breath sounded louder than normal. And the thing that worried me most wasn't what I had seen Caleb do. It was how calm I felt afterward, because that kind of calm usually comes from experience. And experience often means you already know where the story is heading. After breakfast, Brooke cleaned the table. Caleb went to the garage. Eleanor returned to her room. I stayed behind. The old wooden table carried marks from decades of family meals. Coffee stains, scratches, faded rings from hot mugs. Time leaves evidence behind. People do too. Later that afternoon, I went to my study. The room had remained mostly untouched since retirement. Brooke had shown unusual interest in the filing cabinet several times. I always told her it contained old paperwork, nothing important. She never pushed further. I opened the cabinet. Inside were documents I had quietly collected over several weeks. Credit card statements, bank records, insurance papers, things that didn't make sense, large debts, frequent cash withdrawals, unexplained expenses. Then there was the insurance policy. Brooke had accidentally left it on my desk one afternoon. At least she claimed it was an accident. She said it was routine paperwork, nothing important, but it was important, very important. The policy was worth $3 million. $3 million, enough money to completely change someone's future. Eleanor's name appeared on every page. So did her signature, a weak signature, a shaky signature, A signature that looked as though it had been obtained during a moment of confusion or exhaustion. I slowly turned each page. Brooke was clever. Very clever. She had a gift for making complicated things sound harmless, for making dangerous things sound reasonable. That evening, Caleb returned home carrying an old dash camera. He mentioned needing footage from previous family trips. The moment I saw it, I remembered something. Caleb never changed passwords. He never worried about security. Not when he thought nobody was paying attention. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I went to the garage. Using a small lamp, I connected the camera. I skipped through hours of recordings. Most of it was useless. Then I heard voices. Brooke and Caleb. The audio was clearer than the video. Is that dosage enough? Brooke asked. A pause followed. Then Caleb answered, I think so. Another pause. If it doesn't work, we increase it. My stomach tightened. No names, no explanations, no details. Just a conversation that sounded disturbingly casual, as if they were discussing weather or groceries, not a human life. I turned the recording off and returned everything exactly where I found it. Before going to bed, I stopped outside Eleanor's room. A small nightlight glowed beneath the door. I listened to her breathing, slow, steady, fragile. I stood there for several moments. Then I quietly walked away. The next morning arrived. Breakfast looked exactly the same. Same table, same chairs, same oatmeal. But something had changed. Brooke lifted her spoon before Eleanor. Her hand trembled slightly. Only a little, but enough for me to notice. Caleb watched her constantly. The careful mask he usually wore was beginning to crack. Brooke took a bite. Immediately, something shifted in her expression. A tiny frown appeared, then vanished. The oatmeal tastes different, she said. Caleb looked up. Different how? I don't know, Brooke replied. There's a bitter taste. I calmly drank my tea. No satisfaction, no victory, only certainty. The truth was finally moving toward the surface, and once that process begins, it becomes impossible to stop. 15 minutes later, Brooke started feeling worse. At first, she seemed restless. She shifted in her chair, touched her chest, looked uncomfortable. Then her breathing changed. Caleb noticed immediately. He leaned toward her and whispered something. Brooke shook her head, tried to smile, failed. The atmosphere in the room became tense. Even Eleanor sensed it. What's wrong? She asked softly. Before anyone could answer, Brooke stood up. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. I don't feel well, she said. Her voice sounded weak. Maybe I'm just tired. She took 2 steps, then stopped. Her face turned pale. She grabbed the edge of the table. Caleb rushed toward her. She pushed him away. For the first time that morning, fear appeared in his eyes. Dad, he said nervously, do you think something is wrong? I placed my cup down. You should ask your wife. My voice remained calm. Brooke struggled to breathe. Sweat appeared on her forehead. Eleanor looked frightened. I gently motioned for her to stay seated. Not yet. The moment hadn't arrived. Caleb looked toward the phone, toward the door, toward me. He seemed trapped. We should call someone, he said, but he sounded uncertain because he knew exactly what might be happening. And deep down, he knew I knew too. Brooke sank back into her chair. Then suddenly she looked at Caleb. Panic exploded across her face. You told me it wouldn't have a smell, she shouted. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. You said it was safe. Caleb turned white. What are you talking about? He whispered. But the performance was over. Brooke laughed bitterly. You said we only had to wait a little longer, she said. You said everything would be clean and easy. Then she pointed directly at him. And now you're just sitting there. I slowly stood, walked to the dining room door, and locked it. The click echoed through the room. What are you doing? Caleb demanded. I returned to the table carrying a stack of papers. The documents landed softly in the center, but their weight was enormous. We're going to talk, I said, right now. Brooke stared at the papers. Caleb refused to look. In those files, I continued, are your debts, your conversations, your insurance policy, and evidence of every mistake you thought I would never discover. Eleanor slowly rose and came to stand beside me. Her hand trembled as she touched my arm. Harlan, she whispered softly. I placed my hand over hers and looked directly at our son. For the first time in a very long while, nobody in that room was pretending anymore. Here's your edited version, with slight wording changes, simple English, and the same meaning and flow. Caleb turned toward me, searching for the right words. Dad, I just need one more chance. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. You had plenty of chances, I said quietly. You simply chose not to use them to protect your family. Eleanor stood beside me, her posture stronger than it had been earlier that morning. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She only looked at her son the way someone watches a door slowly close for the final time. When they were escorted away, I didn't go after them. I remained in the dining room where everything had started. The bowl of oatmeal still sat on the table, untouched and cold. I understood that from this point forward, nothing would ever be exactly the same again. But sometimes closing a door isn't about ending something forever. Sometimes it's about making sure the darkness never finds its way back inside. The house became quiet almost immediately after they left. Not the warm, peaceful kind of silence, but the strange stillness that comes after a storm. Everything remains standing, yet somehow nothing feels quite where it used to be. Eleanor slowly settled into her favorite armchair. Her breathing became calm and steady, as though she had finally put down a burden she had been carrying for far too many years. I stood near the window and watched the rain disappear completely. Soft afternoon sunlight spread across the yard and touched the aging walls of the house we had called home for so long. For the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply exhausted. The days that followed moved forward quietly. Everything was handled the way it needed to be, one step at a time, without rushing anything. Eleanor and I rarely spoke about what had happened. There was no need. Some truths, once brought into the open, don't require endless discussion. They simply remain there, clear for everyone to see. One morning, while we were having breakfast together, Eleanor gently placed her hand over mine. "We can't stay here anymore," she said softly. It wasn't really a suggestion. It was a simple truth, spoken aloud. I nodded. I had been feeling the same way for a long time. This house carried too many memories. Some were beautiful, others had become too painful to hold on to. So we began sorting through everything room by room. There was no rush. There was no bitterness. We simply decided what belonged in our future and what needed to remain behind. When I closed the door to my study for the final time, I didn't lock it. Instead, I left it slightly open. It felt like a small reminder that the past doesn't have to be trapped away forever. It simply shouldn't be allowed to control our lives. The estate was transferred quietly. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no emotional farewells. The money we received gave us the opportunity to begin something we had both dreamed about for years but had never truly spoken about. Together, we created a small support fund. It didn't have a fancy name. There were no impressive advertisements or polished promises. It was simply a place where older people could find help when the trust they placed in their families had been broken. People who once believed their loved ones would always keep them safe. People who discovered that wasn't always true. Eleanor became deeply involved. She spent her time listening. I focused on the paperwork and organization. Each of us contributed in our own way, just as we had throughout our entire marriage. Our new home stands near the sea. It's not large. It's not luxurious. But every morning when I open the window, I hear the sound of the waves rolling toward the shore. Steady, reliable, patient. Eleanor enjoys making fresh mint tea every morning. The scent fills the small kitchen and drifts gently through the house. There is no more oatmeal, no more uncomfortable breakfasts, no more mornings filled with tension. One afternoon, Eleanor sat on the balcony while sunlight reflected softly through her hair, now much more silver than before. She smiled at me. It wasn't a forced smile. It wasn't a brave smile. It was real. "I feel better," she said quietly, and I believed her, not because of any reports, numbers, or reassuring words. I believed her because her eyes had changed. The fear was gone. The sadness no longer lived there. She looked like herself again. I sat beside her with a warm cup of tea in my hands. As we watched the ocean, I found myself thinking about family, about responsibility, about what people often call obligation. For most of my life, I believed blood relationships could never truly be broken. I thought family was something permanent no matter what happened. But age teaches lessons that youth often refuses to hear. Now I understand something very different. Family isn't a bond that demands endless suffering. Family is meant to protect us when we are weakest. Family is supposed to stand beside us when life becomes difficult. And when that protection disappears, walking away is not betrayal. Sometimes it is the only path to survival. We never tried to erase what happened. We never pretended it didn't exist. Instead, we chose not to live inside that pain every single day. Some chapters must come to an end. Not because we want to forget them, but because our hearts deserve the chance to breathe again. That evening, a cool sea breeze moved across the balcony. The air felt fresh and peaceful. Eleanor rested her hand gently on mine. "At last, we're at peace," she said. I looked toward the distant horizon where the fading sunlight slowly disappeared into the coming night. Then I nodded, because this time, I wasn't waiting for anything. I finally understood that peace doesn't come from holding on to everything. Peace comes from knowing when it's time to let go. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for listening. If this story gave you something to think about, please consider liking and sharing it with others who may need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss future family stories. The message I want to leave with you is simple. Family should never be a place where people suffer in silence. Family should be the place where we feel safest when we are most vulnerable. And sometimes the hardest decision of all is choosing to walk away quietly. Yet that choice can be the very thing that protects the last good part of who we are. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here until the very end.